Hey y'all, this is Brown at IF Brown, and today we're going to be talking about Ghost Rider, Wolverine, and Punisher in Hearts of Darkness. So you have some really cool front cover art here by John Romita Jr. You've got Ghost Rider, swinging away with his chains. Then you have Wolverine slicing away with his claws, and Punisher blazing away with one of his many automatic weapons. And all three of these guys are teamed up against the hordes of hell. And this piece of artwork always made me think of, say, an early 90s heavy metal album cover come to life, but then thrown into the Marvel Universe. Because all three of these characters were, definitely what you would call metal, as far as their intensity and grittiness, and the popularity with the crowd of readers that like their heroes a little bit darker than your bright and cheerful spandex clad heroes. So then you turn it around here for the back cover. You have a moody piece by artist Garney. You have Ghost Rider, Wolverine, and Punisher all looking very grim and ready to kill someone. So this trade paperback collection came out in 2017, and it contains the stories Hearts of Darkness, as well as its sequel, The Dark Design. And Hearts of Darkness is a book that originally came out around the tail end of 1991. And the fact that all three of these characters were in the same book together was something that was rather noteworthy for fans of these characters, because while Ghost Rider had certainly encountered both Punisher and Wolverine in other books, more specifically, Ghost Rider, aka Danny Ketch Ghost Rider, and Punisher first encountered each other in issues 5 and 6 of Ghost Rider's own series. And then the first time Ghost Rider and Wolverine encountered each other was in the pages of Marvel Comics Presents in the Acts of Vengeance storyline. So this wasn't necessarily the first time this wasn't the first time these characters had encountered each other, but this is the first time that all three of them were in one place together, and basically, sharing a common adventure and a common foe. And you have to understand something, that the Danny Ketch Ghost Rider book was something that was considered a fledgling title, but in terms of sales and popularity in the early 90s especially, it managed to keep track with other top-selling books that Marvel was putting out, such as the Punisher books, the Spider-Man books, and most noteworthy, the X-Men books. And so for a relatively new book to be able to keep up with these top-selling titles, that's pretty impressive. And so these days, having all three of these characters teaming up together in another title or another book would be considered nothing special. I mean, it's kind of been there, done that. I mean, yeah, you're probably going to get a fun action-filled story, but at the same time, most people would look at the notion of all three of these characters teaming up together in one book and be like, what's so special about that? I mean, not to say like the book would be bad or anything. It's just, like I said, been there, done that. But at the point in time that this particular story was being done, the fact that all three of these characters were together in one book was, rather shocking, for a lot of readers. I mean, shocking in a good way, because all three of these characters were very popular and they had their own fan bases. And so to have them all in one book, I mean, it was kind of like hype and popularity overload in the best ways possible. And so I think one's enjoyment of Hearts of Darkness is probably going to depend on how much they like stuff from the early 90s. Because every decade, in terms of comic books, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, has had their good stuff and had their bad stuff. And I would say that Hearts of Darkness was a point where all three of these characters were kind of in their prime in terms of popularity and storytelling, and with their respective creative teams, of course. And so the fact that you have them at this level all together basically makes for a rather entertaining book. Now, if you never really read stuff from the 90s, then you might look at this, particular collection and might just be like, it's okay. I mean, it's got some cool pictures, but if you weren't, say, a fan of either three of these characters at the time that this book came out, you're probably just, going to be like, okay, I can recognize that, it was a big deal when it came out, but now it's just kind of eh. But me personally, I mean, as I've said in other reviews, I was born in the 80s, raised in the 90s, and so I grew up on a lot of 90s stuff. And even several years later, I'm coming across stuff, from that point in time, to where I'm sort of able to, look back and imagine what it was like when certain books were coming out, and reading them in chronological order, that kind of thing. So it's like I'm kind of putting myself, I feel like I'm putting myself in the shoes of someone who was reading comics in the 90s and getting an almost vicarious thrill, so yeah, Hearts of Darkness, in my opinion, definitely a good book. Its sequel, The Dark Design, it's something I have mixed feelings on, because on one hand, there are plot elements I do appreciate, and I think that Howard Mackie, who wrote both stories and was also the regular Ghost Rider writer at that point in time, there's a certain sense of consistency in terms of how certain characters are handled, but I think with Hearts of Darkness, there's a more focused story, whereas with The Dark Design, it kind of feels like it was an afterthought. It's like someone said, hey, Hearts of Darkness was a popular story, why don't we do a sequel to it? And so there are some ideas that were thrown around, and once you get the final result, you can see like there's definitely some interesting things here and there, and the artwork's actually pretty good, but there's not as much of a focus, in my opinion. So like it's a cool looking story, but in terms of, say, going away being wowed, I think Hearts of Darkness is the better of the two. But there's also a nice little little reprint here in the back where they took an interview from an issue of Marvel Age, and it reprints an interview with artist John Romita Jr., where he talks about his career and also about what it was like to draw Ghost Rider for the first time, because he himself admitted that he wasn't really a fan of Ghost Rider, but when Howard Mackie asked him to come in and draw this Ghost Rider centered story, he's kind of like, okay, I mean, it's a gig, but he actually got into it. Like once he actually started drawing Ghost Rider, then he's like, okay, all right, now I'm a fan. Now I'm having fun, So it was really cool, reading, his take on the book, at the point that, because it was written at the time that Hearts of Darkness had come out, and so it was really nice, it was really cool, getting to see an artist go from one end to the other, as far as not really caring about one character, but then once they actually started working on them, they're kind of like, hey, I like drawing this guy, that kind of thing. And of course, he was always fond of drawing Punisher and Wolverine, because the Punisher, he had done a lot of artwork for the character in one book or another, and he had also worked with inker Klaus Janson on that book extensively. So the two of them working together on Hearts of Darkness, he was talking about, it was like working with an old friend, because they more or less were old friends, So yeah, it's a nice little interview, and especially if you're a fan of Hearts of Darkness, it's kind of like a nice little bonus for the fans. And so, yeah, this was just like a nice little collection. And if you grew up reading the book, or either Hearts of Darkness and or The Dark Design at the times in which they came out, then this is probably going to be a nice little flashback. And plus, the bonus of the John Romita Jr. interview. And even if you didn't grow up reading this stuff, I mean, it's a nice little time capsule from the early '90s when all three of the characters were kind of in their creative primes, more so with Hearts of Darkness than the Dark Design. But okay, so getting into the actual story. So we're going to start with Hearts of Darkness because that book came first. And whereas the Dark Design came out in 1994, so obviously we'll do that second. But the Hearts of Darkness, it starts off in this rural town called Christ's Crown, and there is a segment of the population that is unfortunately into the rather nasty activity of human sacrifice and demon worship. And more specifically, they're worshiping a demon who ends up being a familiar face, to those who are well versed within the supernatural of the Marvel Universe. This demon named Blackheart, who is the son of Mephisto, who in turn is kind of like the Marvel Universe's version of the devil, that kind of thing. And so Christ's Crown on its surface, I mean, it's a nice little rural area, sort of storybook, postcard, small town, rural beauty, that kind of thing. But there on that shadow side, though, I mean, there is a segment of the population that has secret rites and rituals, away from the place. Like there's this massive grove of thorns, in a certain area away from the town that they conduct their rituals, and it's on their latest human sacrifice. They end up summoning Blackheart. And Blackheart, at this point in time, has been in a constant struggle with his father Mephisto, and he's wanting to usurp Mephisto and take his place as the ruler of Hell. But unfortunately, Mephisto, in other books prior to this one, had, I believe, cursed him, or at least used his powers on him to where Blackheart, he did have a sense of free will, and he could choose to go a certain way as far as scheming and what have you. But the longer he was in the world of men, he ran the risk of going further insane. And so I have to admit that I haven't read the story in which that actually happened, but the only reason I know that part is because I was reading the interview with John Romita Jr., and he gives like a quick little explanation. So anyway, Blackheart ends up being summoned by these followers of this cult of his, and basically he's really pissed off and angry about the situation he's in. What with his father having cursed him and all, or basically kicked him out of hell. And so instead of just accepting the sacrifice that his cult has provided for him, he basically just drains the life force of all of them, turning them into desiccated skeletons and burning skeletons as well. And so as he's messing around with their bones and bemoaning his lot in life, he starts to get an idea, because while he himself is unable to go after Mephisto because of Mephisto's constant gaslighting of him as far as messing with his sanity, he decides to pick a couple of people to do the job for him. And in this case, he's singled out Danny Ketch, the new host of Ghost Rider, and then Wolverine, aka Logan, as well as the Punisher, aka Frank Castle. And he has, through his own means, sent each of them a message inviting them to come to Christ's Crown, wherein they will be, given answers to, questions that they've had for years, and supposedly. And so, Danny Ketch, the message he got, is basically promising him answers, to, who and what, Ghost Rider really is, as well as answers about the Soul Crystal. And so as Danny Ketch, makes his way to Christ's Crown by way of, cross-country, motorcycle ride, he gets to the town and he's kind of exploring it. And it's like, oh, picture perfect, postcard looking town, right? And he gets to his boarding house and he introduces himself to the woman that works there, and he makes friends with her daughter, a girl named Lucy, who seems to have a knack for picking out people who are good or evil. And her mom just kind of explains that she's always had a talent for stuff like that. And so it's like, if she's on one hand, she's a little she wishes that her daughter weren't so trusting around strangers, but at the same time though, she points out that when Lucy's friendly with someone, then more than likely that person's actually a good person. And so, when Lucy's interacting with Danny, the two of them kind of become friends. And, Danny tells her that, he had a, big sister that, kind of, reminded him of her. And, she was asking, something like, well, did she, grow up, to be, did she, grow up to be, beautiful and, big and strong and all that? And Danny, of course, he doesn't have the heart to tell her that, no, his sister was murdered by an enemy of his. And so he just, sort of white lies and says, yeah, she did. And so, so after, he's, talked with Lucy and made friends with her, her mom brings Danny into the boarding house and shows him around and tells him that, there's going to be two other boarders, in the house. And later during dinner, he meets them, Mr. Logan and Mr. Frank. And so, obviously, this is, Wolverine and Punisher. And Punisher's in a very questionable disguise of having a fake mustache on. But, the three of them, they're talking and, sort of being kind of friendly with one another, but at the same time, holding back, certain, details about why they're there, that kind of thing, because they're just kind of all gauging the room. Whereas Lucy and her mom, they don't really know any better. They don't know that these three guys have encountered each other before in different ways. And so you got later on that night, you have Danny in his room, trying to figure out why he feels like he's met Wolverine before, as well as, Punisher, because he did meet them, but it was as Ghost Rider, not as himself, as Danny Ketch. And Wolverine ends up hitting up Punisher that same night and basically saying, hey, are you here for the same reason I am? And Punisher's like, yeah, you got some strange notes too? And Wolverine's like, yeah. And so the two of them are literally comparing notes, and Punisher is saying that the note he got, claimed to know where, the last person was who murdered his family was being holed up at, or was in hiding at. And so, the Punisher, he was basically saying that, before he and Wolverine started comparing notes, he was, kind of, making mental notes to himself, but he's talking about how, he knows, where the last person was who killed his family, and he's like literally in the ground because he hunted down and killed every single person who had something to do with the death of his family. And so he's like, I know that this is bullshit, but at the same time, the fact that someone was able to get a message to me about this and find me, I don't like that. And so that's why, he's there. That's why he's in Christ's crown. And whereas Logan, when he's talking with Frank, he's telling him that, yeah, I got, someone sent me a note, it was basically some BS about, knowing, knowing the answers as to, who really gave me, the adamantium, on my skeleton, and what this means for me in the long run, stuff like that. And so Wolverine's kind of at a point where this is before he really knew his origin and all that, and he was at a point where he's like, yeah, I know this happened to me, but at the same time, I'm not I'm not going to let it control my life. Yes, it'd be on one hand it'd be nice to know how I got all this, but at the same time, I'm not going to kowtow to someone just for a little snippet of information. But at the same time, kind of like Frank, he's kind of like, he doesn't like the fact that someone was able to find him and get a note to him about this information. So that's why he's at Christ's Crown. And so all three of them, are there and, trying to figure out what's going on when all three of them are visited by Blackheart. And, basically, he's, offering them a chance to take on a genuine source of evil, namely his father Mephisto. And he's explained to them that all three of them are heroes who confront the edge of morality every time they go out and fight crime and what have you. It's like neither of them are scared of basically fighting fire with fire, but at the same time they have the moral limits. Like there's an edge and they'll go up to it, but they won't cross it. And so as he's talking to them, he's trying to make his case that Mephisto is a source of evil that has plagued the world for Lord knows how long, and he's giving them a chance to team up with him and take Mephisto out, because he himself can't do it. But at the same time, it's like all three of these guys, they're kind of like, okay, we may not know much about Blackheart here, we may not know much about who he is, but at the same time, by his own admission, he's a demon from hell. And so do we really want to do the dirty work of a demon from hell? Because hell is a real thing, and anytime anyone deals with hell, it doesn't go well. And so at first, they try and throw, like Punisher. He's straight up like, no way. And on the other hand, Wolverine at least tries to say, hey, look, Mephisto is a little out of my league. Why don't you try someone like Doctor Strange or something like that? So he at least, tries to point him in another direction, as opposed to say straight up, refusing him. But he ends up ultimately refusing Blackheart. And Danny, though, he's the one who seems to take Blackheart's offer into consideration the most seriously. Because at this point in time, both Danny Ketch and Ghost Rider himself were trying to figure out, what Ghost Rider's story really was, and what Danny Ketch's connection to him was, because there seems to be something going on there. It's drawn the two together. Like there's a reason that that Danny Ketch is the host for Ghost Rider. And so, and also, as Danny Ketch himself remembers, the mention of the soul crystal. The first time that he remembered hearing it was when, Nightmare, was the one who, made contact with him and mentioned it to him. And so, he knows that the soul crystal is tied to, Ghost Rider, as far as, Ghost Rider's, story and his creation or what have you, or at the very least, it's tied to him in a way that, might hold some answers to questions that he has. And so he knows that Blackheart's telling the truth on some level to some degree, but at the same time he also has fought enough evil to where he recognizes that Blackheart is a demonic entity, and while he might have a grain of truth in what he's saying, he's not ready to trust, someone who's a self-professed demon from hell. And so he turns, Blackheart down as well. And Blackheart, naturally gets rather pissed off and, tells them all that, I tried it. I tried to be, basically saying, I tried to, to be nice about it. I tried to be diplomatic about this, but, we'll try it my way now. And so basically he brainwashes the entire town of Christ's Crown, to basically come to the hill, where he was reborn, as in where the human sacrifice was taking place. And, and so Danny, Logan and Frank, they all, come out of the boarding house and they're like, what the hell's going on? Did something happen with you too? And they're like, yeah, like we were all visited by this, black, oily monster that, gave us a bunch of bullshit about, knowing, deep personal, questions or answers to these questions, that kind of thing. And so, and that's when they see that Lucy is being, taken by her mom, who is in a trance along with the other townspeople. But Lucy seems to be the only one who isn't in a trance, and she's trying to, get her mom to snap out of it, but it's not happening. And so, Frank and Wolverine, they're both trying to get to Lucy and also trying to see where the crowd's going. And Danny, he ends up, finding Blackheart, who has, taken his own motorcycle, as in Danny Ketch's own motorcycle, and, turned it into, the Ghost Rider motorcycle that, Ghost Rider has when, Danny Ketch transforms into Ghost Rider. But he basically steals his own vehicle from him, and he also grabs Lucy and, basically, tells them that, if you want to save her, then you have to, follow me, and basically follow him to, the hill, where he will, open a portal to hell, and that's the only way they'll be able to save Lucy. And so he rides off, and, Wolverine and Punisher are, left to try and fight through the crowds. And even though the crowds are being brainwashed, Wolverine and Punisher, they're like, okay, we can't kill these people. They're not in control of themselves. And so they're basically having to, not non-aggressively, make their way through the crowd. And it's naturally slowing them down. But on the other hand, Danny Ketch, he's trying to find another means of transportation. And he actually finds a motorcycle. And, he's able to, break into, the store where it's being held at. And in the process, he cuts himself, and he gets to the motorcycle, and as his blood gets on the handlebars, and he also sees this strange-looking symbol that seems to be similar to the gas cap that was on his original bike, the one that when he made contact with it, turned him into Ghost Rider that first time. So he's looking at this symbol that's appearing on his hands, and he's looking at the bike, which seems to be transforming along with him. And so Danny Ketch turns into Ghost Rider, and he has a newly formed Hell motorcycle, and he takes it to where Blackheart is. And at this point, Wolverine and Punisher, they've made it through the crowds, but unfortunately, they're having to contend with these demonically altered thorn bushes, and basically, they're trying to hack their way through them, but they're just getting cut up really badly. And as Punisher is saying, this is like razor wire. And so at first they're thinking that they can just tough it out and everything, but it's proving even more and more difficult to get through. But then Ghost Rider on his new Hell bike just plows through all the thorns and clears a way for them to get to where Blackheart is. And the three of them end up following Blackheart into hell, or I should say Mephisto's realm. And they have to contend with all these green, weird looking, slimy looking glowing demon things. And there's like a whole army of them. And so the three of them are able to fend them off, and also they're able to defeat Blackheart and rescue Lucy. And in the process, though, they leave Blackheart in such a weakened state, by their own abilities and everything. I mean, you got Punisher, who's ultimately able to, once Blackheart's in a weakened enough state, he's able to further injure him, with his firearms. And you have Wolverine, of course, with the adamantium claws, being able to, slice through him and what have you. And you have Ghost Rider, with both his chains and his fists and spikes. Like he's able to manifest hellfire in his fists and just go to town on Blackheart. And so all that basically takes Blackheart out of the picture. And Blackheart, had previously tried to, right before they had defeated him, had tried to appeal to them once again, and he's, offering, Punisher a way for his family to be resurrected, and he's offering, Wolverine, a chance at revenge against the person who forced the adamantium on him. And he's talking to Ghost Rider, and he's, much like other characters in Ghost Rider's own book, he's convinced that Ghost Rider is really Zarathos with a case of amnesia, and he's offering to restore Zarathos to his former greatness as, a consumer of souls. And so all three of these characters, though, they turned him down, and that's when, they were able to, power up and, and do a final assault on him, which ultimately defeats him. And so Ghost Rider is telling Punisher and Wolverine to get Lucy and get out of there and get back to, our realm, because he, there's something he needs to do. And so, he's, standing before Blackheart, who is basically torn apart but still alive. And, the two of them have, a brief conversation. And then they're joined by Mephisto, who's this really weird, bird-like, red thing with, tendrils and what have you. At least the way John Romita drew him, or John Romita Jr. drew him. And, Mephisto's, telling, Ghost Rider that he's something that intrigues even him, because, he likes to think that he knows everything about hell. But, Ghost Rider is basically, an unknown quantity. Like, he doesn't really know, what his presence in the story means as of yet, so to speak. And so, he says that, he's going to let Ghost Rider go, because he senses that the two of them will meet again. But in the meantime, since the three of them were kind enough to teach his son a lesson, he'll, deal with his son himself. But, he basically sends Ghost Rider on his way. And so Ghost Rider, he makes it out of the hell portal and back into our realm. And, he reconvenes with Wolverine and Punisher. And, the three of them, they're making sure that Lucy's okay. And they're also checking on the townspeople, because, they were going out of their way to make sure that, they didn't hurt them when they were having to, fight through them, but at the same time, they did, try and have to fight somewhat. So it's like they're making sure the townspeople are okay, and thankfully they are. But, they all end up, talking about how, neither of them consider themselves heroes or necessarily good people. But at the same time, sometimes it takes, a dark person, to fight darkness. I mean, as cliche as it sounds. And the fact that, they were able to save, innocent people, from the forces of hell, despite the fact that neither of them, consider themselves to be good men, it's something that they do feel content with. And they realize that, they have survived, a rather momentous encounter with, demonic forces. And so basically they're savoring their moment of triumph. But yeah, Hearts of Darkness, though, I really enjoyed the story. I thought that, as I mentioned before, it captured all three of the characters when they were kind of in their prime in the early 90s. And it was also consistent in terms of, say, how it was consistent with how Ghost Rider and Danny Ketch were being portrayed at that point in time. Because, I mean, once again, you have Howard Mackie, the Ghost Rider writer, working on this book as well. And so there's definitely a sense of consistency, with, how Ghost Rider and Danny Ketch are being portrayed. And while all three of these characters, Ghost Rider, Punisher, and Wolverine, all three of them get a certain amount of focus. Make no mistake, this is Ghost Rider's book. So I liked how the sense of mystery and the questions that both Danny Ketch and Ghost Rider have were brought up once again. And I liked how Blackheart was teasing Danny Ketch and Ghost Rider with some very real answers. and possibly, you know, with Wolverine and Punisher too. But, you know, on the other hand, though, you know, he was probably just BSing the two of them, because as Punisher himself said, he knows exactly where, you know, all the people are who had anything to do with this, you know, the murders of his family. I mean, they're all dead. He killed them. But, and of course, you know, with Wolverine, you know, at this point in time, he didn't know what his full-on origin was. And so, but at the same time, you know, he knows that something traumatic happened to him in the past. But at the same time, he has made a new identity and a new life for himself. He may not remember who he was before he got, you know, the adamantium, you know, bonded to his skeleton, but he knows who he is now. And so he's not about to compromise that. And I actually thought that was a pretty good characterization. And so the characterizations of Wolverine and Punisher were pretty consistent with, in Hearts of Darkness, their portrayals were consistent with other books that had them at this point in time. And also, I thought it was cool that all three of these characters were in a genuinely supernatural situation. You know, because in Ghost Rider's earlier issues, there was some ambiguity as to whether or not any of the foes that he were fighting, like whether or not his earlier foes were genuinely supernatural or not. You know, because most of the time they were sort of like man-made evil, you know, villains. But every now and then there'd be a character where, you know, you're kind of like, okay, is this someone who's genuinely demonic, or just someone who's, you know, very in touch with their evil side, you know, that kind of thing, like with the character of Death Watch or something. You know, so it was fascinating to see, you know, Ghost Rider, you know, finally up against, you know, a foe that was genuinely supernatural in nature. Now, to be fair, I mean, he and Danny Ketch had encountered the character of Nightmare before. And they'd also gone up against Hobgoblin, who at this point had been demonically altered by the demon Nestoroth, I believe is how you say the name. But then, you know, to have him go up against, you know, an aspect of hell, you know, namely, you know, Blackheart, who's the son of Mephisto, who's the Lord of Hell. So, I mean, the fact that he was going up against someone who was genuinely supernatural was actually pretty cool to see, and it was kind of a momentous occasion. And then you have, you know, Wolverine, Punisher, who, I mean, they're a little bit out of their depth in this situation, in the sense that they don't all, it's not every day they go up against literal forces of hell, but at the same time, you know, they do what they can. I mean, you got Punisher with, you know, the weapons he brought with him, you know, doing all sorts of damage. But at the same time, you're kind of like, okay, you know that these guns have, you know, a limit as to how much ammo they have, and he has a limit to how much ammo he has. And then you have Wolverine, who, yeah, he's got a healing factor, and he's got the claws, but at the same time, you know, up against supernatural forces, I mean, you know, he's got his limits too, you know? So it's like you got two tough guys who, you know, if they were by themselves in this situation, they probably would have, you know, been... They would, Blackheart would have probably wiped the floor with them, you know, but with Ghost Rider helping them, that's what gives them the edge, you know, to be able to literally go into hell, get Lucy out of there, and do some damage against the forces of hell and make it out. So yeah, this was definitely Ghost Rider's book with Punisher and Wolverine guest starring. But all in all, though, I mean, it was, you know, a really cool story. And if you're a fan of, you know, 90s comics in general, Hearts of Darkness is definitely one of the good ones. But I mean, you have some, you know, wonderful artwork by John Romita Jr. And this is, you know, where Wolverine and Punisher were trying to charge through the, you know, Thorn Grove, but, you know, of course they're getting cut up and bleeding like crazy. And then Ghost Rider comes charging through on his new bike. Well, by the way, this is where Danny Ketch is trying to find another bike. And this is where, you know, he's noticing that, you know, he's got that symbol on his hands. And he's able to transform the bike along with himself. And he's never been able to do that before consciously. But, you know, some really good horror art right here. And you got John Romita Jr. following in the footsteps of Javier Saltras and Mark Texeria in terms of, say, the gruesome body transformation of, you know, Danny Ketch into Ghost Rider. And then you got this really cool double page right here. Love this picture. But yeah, also I liked how, you know, Blackheart was drawn. Here he is making contact with all of them. And of course, this is right before, you know, the three of them literally end up in hell. But, you know, you've got Blackheart summoning all these, you know, demons. They're taking Lucy right there. And come to the bottom panel there, they're in hell. I love the shot of Ghost Rider just literally slamming the two of them together, like crushing them with the spikes that he's got. And then he's taking his gloves off and hands Blackheart a royal beatdown. And I think this was like one of the first times that he had literally used, you know, his, you know, bare fist, you know, with that's fused with hellfire, you know, to decimate someone. Because usually he holds back, but, you know, against a straight up demon, You got this nice little shot of Punisher and Wolverine, and basically Wolverine, you know, was able to slice off Blackheart's arm, and then Punisher just, you know, goes to town on him with his weaponry. So you had Ghost Rider, you know, doing his thing, Wolverine doing his thing, and then Punisher, you know, last but not least, you know, doing his thing. And that's how they're able to defeat Blackheart. And this is how Mephisto was drawn at this point in time, or at least when John Romita was working on him. A very weird, creepy, androgynous looking creature. But yeah, and also I like this picture right here. Like when they're back, you know, in our realm, it's like all three of them sort of have a 1,000-yard stare. I mean, it's more apparent with, you know, Punisher here because he has no mask on, but it's like the idea is like all three of them are just like, you know, amazed at, you know, what they just walked out of, you know, that kind of thing. And they saved Lucy too. So yeah, Hearts of Darkness was a good story. So when we get to the dark design, however, this is something that I honestly had some mixed feelings on because on one hand, it is cool to see, you know, all three of these characters together again. But I think that whereas, you know, the artwork, you know, it itself is actually pretty good. I mean, Ron Garney's artwork for Dark Design in and of itself is actually pretty good. I feel like, you know, the way, you know, the story was, you know, put together, both visually and narratively speaking, I feel like it was, we're just kind of thrown into, you know, something that's going on, as opposed to, say, with Hearts of Darkness, there was like a gradual build-up. But with the Dark Design, you know, it's, you know, it takes place, I mean, it was done in 1994, so it took place a few years after Hearts of Darkness, but, you know, suddenly we're thrown into a situation where, you know, Ghost Rider, Wolverine, and Punisher have both been called by Lucy, like almost on a telepathic level, or maybe a spiritual level even, you know, called back to the town of, I mean, to Christ's Crown. And so the story opens up where, you know, Ghost Rider is, you know, trying to help Lucy and a couple of other people who are still surviving in the town, but are unfortunately being, you know, heavily whittled down by the forces of Blackheart, who has, taken it upon himself to make hell on earth with Christ's crown. So basically the whole town is starting to look, very weird, biomechanical, looking in terms of architecture. But he's also, able to assimilate a lot of the people, like on a spiritual level. He's able to corrupt them. And when they literally do end up being called the corrupt, and like they have these necrotic veins on their bodies, like they still look human or humanoid, but it's like their eyes are pitch black and their bodies are just covered in these black veins. And, if one of them, grabs onto someone, they're able to pass the corruption on, to the next person. And so, the people who have been able to hold out, they've been kind of on the run, but, it's like a dwindling party. And unfortunately, this corruption is enough to, to do some damage to Ghost Rider even, because at one point, when he's helping Lucy and a couple of the other survivors, one of the corrupted who was on the ground and is dying, was able to grab onto Ghost Rider's hand and pass the corruption onto him. And so, since Ghost Rider is something of a supernatural entity, like he's able to hold off, the corruption long enough to transform back into Danny Ketch. But unfortunately, though, this corruption, it's actually starting to make its way into Danny Ketch, to the point where, it's only a matter of time before he becomes corrupted as well. And so, Wolverine and Punisher ultimately end up doing the lion's share of, the lifting when it comes to fighting. And so it turns out that Blackheart, it's kind of a retreat of the story before, in the sense that he's still trying to assassinate his father, Mephisto, so he himself can be the Lord of Hell. And Mephisto, of course, is still messing with his mind to the point where, trying to make coherent plans is something that is exceedingly difficult for him. But nonetheless, he has tried, and he is wanting to, corrupt the entire town of Christ's crown. But he's also wanting to use Lucy, who seems to be, blessed with this power, and he's wanting to use her power as a way to, further, I guess you could say, domesticate, the population of Christ's crown, so they'll fall, into his sway that much easier. And then, he wants to lead this army into hell, and that way he can take out his father himself. And he's got like a bunch of meat shields between him and, Mephisto's demons. But it's not really clear exactly what Lucy is, because Wolverine and Punisher are asking her, is like, okay, so we remember you, but we don't remember you having any powers. What happened? And so Lucy just explains that when she became a teenager, she, like everyone else, went through changes, physical changes and everything, but she also seemed to have this ability that just manifested itself. Like she's able to, call someone from like miles away on a telepathic level, but also, people who are around her, it's like they're blessed, they're hit with a feeling of hope and optimism. Like in the situation they're in, the dwindling party, they because they're with her, they feel like there's a sense of hope, in a sense that they can beat Blackheart. I keep wanting to say Blackout, but that's another Ghost Rider foe. And so it's implied that she's a mutant, but they just don't come out and say it. And I did think that was kind of interesting, in the sense that, in the first story, in Hearts of Darkness, Blackheart, made a point of saying that Lucy was the most innocent person in town. And so you factored that in, and so it's like, imagine having an innocent person being corrupted by the forces of hell. I mean, that's always going to be a boost to the side of evil. But then you find out that she's a mutant in this story, and you're kind of like, okay, certain things kind of make a little more sense as far as, why she's able to determine that certain people are good or bad, because she's able to, feel it in her head, that kind of thing. And so, I mean, so that made her character a little more interesting. but I think that there were certain things I liked about it, the book, but it just really feels like they came up with a lot of stuff at the last minute, because there's a lot of very rushed plot developments. Like the fact that we're literally dropped into the story in the middle of this invasion of the town. I mean, we don't really. It's not a gradual approach. It's a rapid fire approach, and I think that I appreciated the gradual approach to the story that Hearts of Darkness had, as opposed to the rapid fire approach with this one. I mean, because to be sure, I mean, when the action scenes are going on, I mean, we get some good scenes and everything. Ron Garney, I mean, he was always good drawing Ghost Rider when he's had to handle him, and he also does a good job with Wolverine and Punisher. But I mean, look at this right here, kind of a double page spread here. Punisher and Wolverine going up against the armies of the corrupt. I mean, it's some really cool artwork. And then, of course, you got the corrupt, making their first full appearance. And so, I mean, I think they look interesting, but I kind of miss, the straight up, demons, that were present in Hearts of Darkness. I mean, because here, I mean, they look creepy and everything, but at the same time, they just look like, they kind of look like humans, they look like, members of a goth crowd, from a goth club or something, albeit with, pitch black eyes and, creepy black veins, so you compare that, to the demons that we saw in Hearts of Darkness, and from a visual level, like, this isn't bad artwork at all, but it's just, in terms of conveying, the hellish nature of, Blackheart and his powers, I think, the demons that we saw were a better, depiction of the forces of hell than, say, just some possessed humans, if that makes sense. But this is where Ghost Rider, like, one of the things that I thought was interesting is that because these people are filled with the darkness of Blackheart, it actually takes a toll on Ghost Rider when he's fighting them, because he's fighting against their collective darkness, and that leaves him vulnerable to being grabbed by one of them on the ground, and that's how he ends up getting corrupted. And so he ends up transforming back into Danny Ketch there to kind of, buy some time. But, okay, I love this picture right here. Ron Garney, I think, just, like, he does a really good job of, introducing the characters here, and Wolverine just looks amazing. I mean, this is like the, primal Wolverine that a lot of us grew up with. They're a badass pose there. But then you got Punisher coming in and saving the day because Wolverine was outnumbered, and you got a sniper rifle, you got, whatever kind of gun that is, and yeah, put some targets in front of the Punisher, and yeah, pretty badass picture. So yeah, the artwork here is really good as well. And here's where, the town's kind of being turned into sort of this weird metal organic, looking place. So yeah, I mean, art-wise, I think, the book's good, but I think it's mainly in the story area where, it kind of falters, because, I know I've already said it, but, the fact that we're dropped in, to the story in the middle of a demonic invasion, and we don't really have a time to catch up with anyone, unless it's, through some very rushed exposition by way of the survivors, of the town. They're, catching up, Wolverine, Ghost Rider, and Punisher. I mean, other than that, though, we don't get much in the way of, I guess you could say, solid exposition, or narrative development. It's just, boom, it's happening, And while I do like the idea of Lucy being a mutant, which I mean made Blackheart's interest in her in Hearts of Darkness, make more sense, as opposed to her just being an innocent little kid. I do wish that we'd gotten a little more backstory with her. Like maybe we could have seen a flashback or something, with her family, because unfortunately her mother was one of the first ones killed. When the corrupted were invading the town, and she was a memorable character from Hearts of Darkness, and so it would have been nice to have seen her more before she was killed, off screen, as it were. And also, it was kind of weird, having Blackheart, basically trying to make Lucy into what was essentially a child bride. Also he could, basically, take her, power for his own, and what have you. Like that part, it's kind of like the imagery and all. I mean, it's good artwork, but it's kind of creepy too, in a sense of, I guess you could say the implications. But sorry, give me a sec here. All right, here we are. So yeah, I mean, it's not bad artwork or anything. It's just, the part where Blackheart's, kind of trying to make her into a child bride. You're kind of like, yeah, that's a little creepy. And so, thankfully, Blackheart, he gets his, ass handed to him, but then it turns out that, earlier he had been able to, cut Lucy with a knife. And so because there's innocent blood on the knife, he's able to use that against Mephisto. And, after, Ghost Rider and Wolverine and Punisher and Lucy and, the few survivors of the town were able to flee the area, Blackheart in his weakened state, he's confronted by his father, by Mephisto, who is basically kind of, treating him as a joke at this point, but because he has this, blade with Lucy's innocent blood on there, he's able to stab Mephisto and seemingly kill him. And the book ends with, Blackheart, basically just, taking over hell. So that part, I guess maybe it was because, I've seen a lot of stories that have come out after this involving Mephisto. And so obviously, Blackheart's, murder of his own father didn't stick, but at the same time, I mean, I don't know if this is a development that was shocking for back in the day, like, Mephisto being killed, but at the same time, considering how prevalent Mephisto is on the evil side of the Marvel Universe, I mean, you just know that he's going to come back, that kind of thing. So I guess there's a, disadvantage there. So yeah, all in all though, I mean, the focus of this collection, I think, was the highlight of the collection was definitely Hearts of Darkness, but the dark design, I mean, it's a decent enough sequel, like in the sense that it's good to see certain characters again, and they look awesome and all that, but there are certain things that just feel rushed. And also, this could be a good thing or a bad thing, but one of the complaints that some people had about Hearts of Darkness is that, on one hand, it was definitely a Ghost Rider story, but at the same time, Punisher and Wolverine, they were relegated to supporting roles. Which is not necessarily a problem, but it didn't feel like there was enough focus, given to all three characters at the same time, some people felt like, as good of a Ghost Rider story as Hearts of Darkness was, they felt like that the focus on all three characters was uneven. Whereas, in the dark design, it seems like they were trying to remedy that by having, Wolverine and Punisher, being the ones to have more focus than Ghost Rider. So Ghost Rider in Hearts of Darkness is a part of the story, but he doesn't have as much prevalence or importance as he did in Hearts of Darkness. And so Some people might like that if they're, say, more Punisher or Wolverine fans than Ghost Rider fans. But for, Ghost Rider fans, that's something that might, annoy them, that kind of thing. But yeah, so all in all, though, it's definitely, I mean, the collection as a whole, it's a good collection. And the fact that you have both stories in one book, and they do a good job of making it look good, maybe punching up some of the visual qualities, because these were stories from the 90s. And also, the little bonus of having the interview with John Romita Jr. at the time Hearts of Darkness was coming out, it really gives you that time capsule experience. So I'm going to go ahead and give Hearts of Darkness 4 out of 5 stars, with the caveat that the focus being Hearts of Darkness, and you get your money's worth with that story alone, but the Dark Design is just sort of a ho-hum sequel. I mean, it's a nice little bonus treat, in my opinion. Like, it's something that, if the story had never been made, I mean, we probably wouldn't have missed much or gained much. But I mean, we wouldn't have missed much, if that story had never been made. But because it was made, I think it's more of a nostalgic reunion type story, as opposed to, say, something that stands on its own as a solid story, as Hearts of Darkness was. So it's like Dark Design was a nice little bonus treat, but just bear in mind that Hearts of Darkness is definitely the better story. But on the other hand, both stories have really good artwork, respectively by John Romita Jr. and Klaus Janson in Hearts of Darkness, where they excelled at the grim and gritty elements and even the horror elements. And then you have Ron Garney and inker Al Milgrom working together for the Dark Design story. So you have two distinct visual styles, and both good in their own ways. So the book definitely looks good for sure. But yeah, it was fun to look back on, and definitely a time capsule of the early 90s. But I mean that in a good way, though. So thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. You got any questions, comments? Please drop a line. Let me know. Any Ghost Rider or comic factoids you want to toss my way, please do so. But y'all take care. Good night. Bye.